Are you familiar with the work of Rutger Bregman? He's a famous Dutch historian who has written a very popular book called A Hopeful History. In it, he argues that most people are morally good. In this video, I will evaluate his best examples. I will show you that these examples not only fail to prove that most people are good, but that they prove the exact opposite. Hello, my name is Karel de Lange and this is my channel The Thinking Dutchman. I want to help you see and defend the truth of Christianity. This is my second video in my ongoing series about Bregman's book A Hopeful History. Let me start with a recap. In the previous video I discussed three major flaws of his book. The first flaw is that he did not explain what he means with good and evil. Because of this, it's impossible to determine whether he has succeeded in showing that most people are good. That is why I've defined it. In a nutshell, altruism is good and selfishness is evil. After that, I've evaluated his case about natural disasters. Bregman argued that research has shown that most people offer help for the victims after a natural disaster has occurred. He sees this as good evidence that most people are good. This example is actually very shallow, and even if all that he presented is true, it is not evidence that most people are morally good. Check out my first video to get a better idea of the arguments. Now in this video I will offer a response to two of his most important examples that he uses to prove that most people are morally good. In chapter 4, Bregman makes the case that most soldiers are unwilling to shoot in wartime. He focuses on an investigation of Colonel Samuel Marshall, who served in World War II in Japan. He interviewed his soldiers and discovered that 75 to 85% of them didn't shoot. Bregman makes clear that this is not an isolated event. He mentions several more stories. He concludes from this that people feel much resistance against violence because they have an inclination to be good. I'm not sure whether this is all true, but if he's right, what does it prove? Well, it only proves that man is reluctant to shoot a fellow human being. That's all. Does it follow that we are inclined to be morally good? To answer this question, we need to determine the motivation of the soldiers. If soldiers are unwilling to shoot out of concern for the well-being of the enemy, then the act of refusing to shoot is altruistic. But if soldiers are unwilling to shoot simply because they are scared, then the act is out of concern for themselves. In other words, if soldiers are motivated by fear, it follows that they act selfishly when they refuse to pull the trigger. So figuring out the motivation of the soldiers is crucial. Can we find out? Fortunately, yes. Marshall himself concluded from his own investigation that soldiers were motivated by fear. He said, "Fear of killing rather than fear of being killed was the most common cause of battle failure." This actually makes a lot of sense, because if most soldiers would be so altruistic that they are even concerned about the well-being of their enemies, then you'd expect they would at least have a similar concern for the well-being of their comrades. But the refusal to shoot has the unfortunate consequence that their comrades are exposed to more danger, because the enemy, who poses a great threat for their safety, is not killed. Where is the concern for their comrades? Apparently, soldiers who refuse to shoot do so out of fear, out of concern for themselves, not out of concern for others. It follows that Bregman's example is not just bad evidence that people are altruistic, but good evidence that people are selfish. But it gets even worse. Bregman uses conflicting facts to draw the same conclusion. Let me explain. In chapter 10, Bregman mentions that during World War II, German soldiers fought very well. The reason, Bregman explains, is that they were concerned about their comrades. Kameradschaft, friendship, was the main motivation to fight. He said, "The boys didn't fight for their home country, they fought for their comrades." He uses this as an argument that the German soldiers were not evil, but good, because they were concerned about their friends. Do you see the problem? Apparently, it doesn't matter for Bregman what the facts are. Whether soldiers are unwilling to shoot or whether they are willing to shoot, he draws the same conclusion. Most soldiers act altruistically and are therefore morally good. If they aren't willing to shoot, it is because they are concerned about the well-being of the enemy. If they are willing to shoot, it is because they are concerned about the well-being of their comrades. So no matter what the facts are, Bregman finds a way to conclude that humans are altruistically motivated. In other words, the facts don't seem to matter to Bregman because he already determined what the conclusion will be. But if the facts don't matter, then it follows that Bregman bases his case not on facts, but on his worldview. He does not seem to be motivated to discover the truth, but to find confirmation for the view that most people are morally good. In chapter 9, Bregman discusses the famous bystander-effect. The bystander-effect is a social psychological theory that states that individuals are less likely to offer help to a victim when there are other people present. There are extreme stories of this effect occurring, such as the death of Catherine Susan Genovese. She was a 28-year-old bartender and was stabbed outside the apartment building where she lived. Apparently, there were many witnesses who could have done something about it, but nobody did anything. This incident became the prime example of the bystander effect. The truth of the bystander effect has been the consensus for a long time, and Bregman aims to show that a meta-analysis of this phenomenon shows that a reversed bystander effect is true. Marie Lindegaard, a Danish social psychologist, gathered a lot of camera footage from fightings, rapes and attempted murders in the streets of Amsterdam, London, Copenhagen and Cape Town. What she found is that in 90% of the cases, people actually help each other out. Bregman uses this investigation to prove that the reversed bystander effect is true, and that most people act altruistically when a fellow human being is in danger. When I read this, I thought that the evidence is pretty compelling. Camera footage simply shows that 90% of the time, bystanders help people who are in danger. Even though this seems compelling evidence for altruistic behavior, I found that this too is actually evidence that most people act with selfish motivations rather than with altruistic motivations. Let me explain. Psychologist Marco van Bommel researched why the camera footage shows a reversed bystander effect. It turns out that when a person is in a state of public self-awareness, they worry about what others think of them, and they seek social approval. They are in a state of awareness that other people can observe and thus evaluate and judge them, based on their behavior and appearance. His study reveals that when people think they can blend in a crowd and be anonymous, they are less likely to offer help, because nobody will know and hold them accountable. This is a good reason why the bystander effect exists. However, when a camera is introduced and people think they are being watched, a reversed bystander effect occurs. The presence of a camera makes all the difference. Let's read what Van Bommel concluded from this research. The data indicate a mechanism not based on accepting responsibility or altruism for the person in need, but one based on salience of the possibility that one is held accountable for one's behavior by other bystanders. Therefore, our findings are most consistent with a model that stipulates that people who are aware of the reputational costs and rewards of their behavior become motivated by concerns of what others may think. So Van Bommel's research shows that the presence of cameras in big cities is the main reason why we now witness a reversed bystander effect. People know they are being watched, so they are concerned about their reputation. What's interesting about these findings is that Bregman's example is not just bad evidence that people are altruistic, but that this is good evidence that they are selfish. People are apparently mainly concerned about themselves, about what others think of them, and not about the victims. In other words, Bregman's example shows that most people are selfish. Apparently nothing inspires your inner activist like the thought of people watching surveillance footage and wondering who the jerk was who just stood there when he could have helped. So let's summarize what we've discussed so far. These are three of the main arguments Bregman presented to show that most humans are morally good. In my previous video we've seen that the first is neutral. The other two aren't even neutral. They prove the opposite. Most people act with selfish motivations. From this it follows that Bregman's best evidence for the goodness of humanity is actually evidence for its depravity. But it gets much worse. So far I've only responded to the best evidence that most people are good. We haven't even started to discuss the overwhelming evidence that most people are evil. Think about the countless genocides of the 20th century. The fact that people with too much power almost always act horribly. The inherent selfishness of children, and the fact that experiments have shown that people are willing to let other people be tortured to death just so that science can advance. Bregman discussed these things and he tried to show that even though people's actions are sometimes evil, their intention is usually good. In the next episode we're going to see that he fails miserably. So subscribe, hit the bell, and if you haven't done so yet, check out my previous episode in this series. Thanks, I will see you in the next one.